Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, welcome to episode 32 of the Stark Reflections podcast. I'm your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. Today I have an interview with C.C. Humphreys, an actor, playwright, fight choreographer, and novelist. Chris has 10 novels that were all traditionally published, several of which have been Globe and Mail Bestsellers. Now, being on the Globe and Mail Bestseller list is like Canada's equivalent to the New York Times bestseller list in the U.S. Chris's historic novel, Plague, won the Crime Writers of Canada's Arthur Ellis Award for Best Crime Novel in 2015. Now, I met Chris last year, 2017, at the When Words Collide conference in Calgary, Alberta, where we were both guests of honor. And I'll still remember those first 2 minutes or so of meeting Chris for the first time. We were at an evening library event the day before the conference began, and this is where all the guests of honor were there to do a talk. And so just prior to going up on stage, we immediately bonded over this discovery of our mutual love of craft beers. Because we were talking about when did you get in, what were you up to? And I said, well, Liz and I got in earlier today. We spent the afternoon enjoying some great beers downtown at this one place. And then his eyes lit up, and that was it. There was a bromance right away. Now, the next night, when we were doing our keynote talks at the conference, we bonded again right in front of the entire audience because I was talking about what I wanted to be. I'd always wanted to be a writer, and then I joked about, well, I wanted to be different things, like a policeman, a fireman, and when The Fall Guy, which was a TV show starring Lee Majors, was on, I wanted to be a stuntman. So as I was saying that I'd wanted to be a stuntman like the character Lee Majors played in that 80s TV show, Chris then joined in and shared the fact that he had actually been on the show. He'd played a man haunted by his dead parents in an episode. Well, that clinched it. We've been pals ever since. So Chris and I talk a lot about his new book, Chasing the Wind, which was traditionally published in Canada by Penguin Random House, but where the rest of the world writes, and this is the first time this has happened to him, including the U.S. rights, belong to him. So he shares his hybrid experience of having a great publisher to work with, but also being able to now do some amazing digital things, self-publishing a version of that book, and the unique experiences that he efficiently adapts into his writing life based on his other experiences as a playwright, as an actor as well. It's a wonderful conversation, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. Now, in personal updates, as I record this, I'm in Levack, Ontario, which is about an hour north of Sudbury. Now, Sudbury is in mid-northern Ontario, and I'm going to be attending a book launch for an author friend of mine, Mathew Del Papa, in Capreol later today. Now, this is Thursday, August 2nd. I wrote the introduction to Matt's book, Creepy Capreol, which he launched a few years ago. Now, Capreol is a small community about an hour north of Sudbury, and as the co-author for Spooky Sudbury, he had asked me to do that because I was known to the audience that Matt was selling to. Now, there will be a bunch of other authors there because it's part of an anniversary, 150th anniversary for Capreol, and I'm being advertised as a special guest who'll be doing a reading and a book signing. And I hope that whatever minor pull I might have brings in a few more people to Matt's book launch. Now, in any case, it is an honor to be considered a special guest that Matt would want to invite. Now, in terms of other updates, I failed big time in terms of getting my Free Friday Frights videos that I do Facebook Live for reproduced and redistributed to YouTube. But I plan on spending some time next week getting caught up on that again, as well as updating the tracking for how the Free Friday Frights has been working in terms of number of views, etc., which I will post to the links on the Patreon site. Speaking of free, a bit of an update on how the perma-free Nocturnal Screams is doing. I've been tracking the stats and noticed an increase in iBooks, which I'm going to get to in a future episode. But I had been, tracking the Kobo stats, and I still have only sold a single copy of Volume 2 in that series on Kobo, even though I've got 10 reviews on it now. However, something odd happened either last week or the week before, and it's kind of weird, is I saw sales from many of my smaller short fiction ebooks on Kobo suddenly sold. I sold one of each of them. It kind of looks like someone went in and just kind of bought one of each of a number of my either single short story standalone ebooks or the chapbook style ebook collections with 2 or 3 stories in them. And it looks like that, but once the July detailed sales report is available through Kobo Writing Life, which will probably be by mid-August that I'll get the July details, I should be able to look at that and determine if it was the same person, because you can use postal code or zip code matching to say, okay, someone at this zip code or postal code bought this book and then bought that book, or downloaded this book and then downloaded the other book. So I want to see was it a free read that led to someone going and buying a bunch of my other books. Maybe it was even Nocturnal Screams Volume 1, which is a perma-free. Or maybe it was one of my other perma-free short story reads that led to this. But again, that analytics is important because I have no idea what led to someone going in wanting to buy a bunch of my other stuff. And that'll help me understand what was it that attracted them, because then maybe I can spend some marketing dollars on pushing that thing. Because if that thing led someone to want to buy everything, then there's something good about that thing, right? Now, since I've been babbling on really, really long, I'm going to save talking about some progress I made on my nonfiction book for writers and to a future episode. And I'm going to now skip to the sponsored segment of this podcast. Now, like last episode, there won't be a tongue twister. I know, you miss hearing me sing that goofy Weird Al style Twisting by the Pool song. But this episode is sponsored by Findaway Voices. And the reason I'm not doing a tongue twister is I wanted to share something that I had to bite my tongue on or hold my tongue on until now. I can now talk about something I've been working on as a new beta option release or soft release from Findaway Voices since it's finally public this week. So Findaway Voices is currently in the soft launch phase of releasing Authors Direct. There'll be a link to that on starkreflections.ca. Now this is a platform and an app that allows authors the ability to sell their audiobooks directly and keep 70% of the income. So the 4 titles I now have available and distributed through Findaway Voices to places like Audible and iTunes and Kobo Audio and Google and dozens of other places, including libraries where I'm making decent amounts of money, are now also available for purchase directly from me through this tool. Now, this is something that has its own landing page, and I'll include a link to it in the show notes, and which I'll be able to add in to my own website, purchase links, etc., as an additional option for people to buy it. They can buy it through Audible or Kobo or Google or directly from me. Again, choice is good for consumers. Now, it's currently invite only for authors, as they're testing the entire process end to end with a live stat. When people buy the audiobooks directly, the Authors Direct app allows them to listen to it directly, so they're not locked into a particular retailer. And again, flexibility, freedom, control. But from my experience, working with the Findaway team on this has been amazing, and they helped create a pretty awesome landing page. They created it and said, well, here's what we did. If you want to tweak it, go ahead. And I took a look at it and went, yeah, this is good. This is really good. I mean, it's beautiful. Now, it's currently the website or the purchase ability is only available in the U.S. right now, so I can't even download and use the app on the consumer end because I'm in Canada. But this is an amazing development, and I know they're going to expand it once they go beyond the soft release. It's yet another innovative and exciting opportunity for writers. And when I first heard about this project earlier this summer when I was in Findaway's office in Cleveland, I was so excited to learn that they were working on this. And this is just a powerful tool and an option that creates endless opportunities for writers. Again, with the growth of audio and the growth of giving authors more power and control, it's been really, really hard for me not to talk about this. So I'm so glad that the soft launch is live and they're now starting to share that. So again, related to Findaway Voices, my earnings just this past month from Findaway were higher than my ebook earnings from both Nook and iBooks combined in the same period. So I'll be endeavoring to get more audiobook titles out in the next 6 months because, again, that's an area where I'm seeing growth of income. Again, it is an investment, and I know earning back that investment takes time, particularly with longer books, but I am seeing the return on that investment in some cases better for those audiobooks than some of the ebooks that I've published, making back the money I spent on cover and editorial, etc. In any case, I'll be sharing some updates in future episodes on how the soft release is going. But that's enough for me and for my corporate podcast sponsor. Let's get on to this conversation with CC Humphreys. Hey, Chris, thank you so much for joining me here today.
It's a great pleasure to be here.
And today, the day that we're recording this is July 30th, and today was the day that you kicked off a promotion for your latest book. First, tell me about your latest book, Chasing the Wind.
Chasing the Wind is a historical thriller, really, set in the 1930s, in 1936-37 particularly. Its protagonist is a young lady called Roxy Lowen. And Roxy is an aviatrix, which is a wonderful word, I think, for a woman flyer. And so she's part of that extraordinary crowd of early women pilots like Amelia Earhart, Pancho Barnes, Beryl Markham, Amy Johnson, extraordinary women who I have fallen collectively and individually in love with because they were quite remarkable. And in the novel, Roxy's really quite mercenary, we think, certainly at the beginning. She's all about the money. Her father was quite wealthy, lost everything in the great crash, and he subsequently killed himself. And she was left with only the plane, which she only just managed to get away from the creditors. And that's the beginning of the story when she's about 19. Amelia Earhart helps her escape. And then the main story begins 7 years later in Ethiopia, where she's gun running, because of course the best money is to be made in the most dangerous places. And she's made a slight mistake. She has this rule: you should never fall in love with flyers. You should only be in love with flight. But she's fallen in love with this guy. Not only is he a flyer, but he's an idealist as well. He's a communist called Jochen Zomack. But he's the son of quite a rich art dealer. And Jochen proposes to Roxy, she doesn't propose to her, but he proposes a plan to her that she go to Madrid and pick up this lost painting, this lost Bruegel called The Fall of Icarus, which many of your listeners will know the original is in Brussels, but apparently the original was painted on wood. And so I come up with this idea that it's been found in Madrid as Spain's slipping into civil war. Roxy flies in, it gets stolen by the Nazis. She chases it to Berlin, reunites with Jocko, and they decide they're just going to have to steal it back from Hermann Goering. So it's a thriller, it's an arts heist book, it's a romance between these sort of mismatched couples. It really centers on Roxy, though. I'm crazy in love with Roxy. She's was a great character to be with. She's really good fun. Her twin passions are flying and smoking. She's one of those 1930s women who just, revel in the cigarettes.
Oh, that's awesome.
And Jocko's a pretty high passion as well. So, it's a roller coaster ride. I mean, you know some of my books already, Mark. I don't tend to pause and describe sunsets for 3 chapters. My stuff moves along.
Yes.
And yeah, it was also the first book that I've written in the 20th century, which I'm excited about because I'm fascinated by that period, given my parents' story, which I think you want to talk about a bit later. So, yeah, it's good fun, and the end of it all ends up. This is not a big spoiler alert because I think it's on the back cover. It all ends up on the Hindenburg.
Okay.
So it's, as I say, not exactly a low concept novel.
Right. So, I mean, I want to go back into historical fiction because of your previous works, but this one is 20th century, and it includes elements of people and places we know. We don't know Amelia Earhart, but many people have heard of her. I've never been on the Hindenburg, thank goodness, but
No,
you don't. But we know about it. how do you merge the reality with the fiction? Like where do you draw the line between what you can adapt and make up and fill in the blanks with?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. It's a debate among historians, or between historians and historical novelists, and among historical novelists about where those lines are and how you cross them. Some people ruthlessly exploit all people in the past. Other people refuse to even contemplate a real life figure. I have done it a lot, obviously, over the years. I've dealt with some important people from history. Usually they're not center stage. Usually the center stage character is one that I've made up.
Like Roxy.
Like Roxy, exactly. And she encounters, actually in this book, really the only major historical figure she encounters is Hermann Goering. Everyone else is made up. The record on Goering is quite clear. We kind of know who he was. So I didn't, and also, let's face it, he's a bad guy, right? So I didn't mind. I don't think there's going to be any irate relatives hammering on my door saying, you have completely misinterpreted my dear uncle's the Führer. I mean, Goering. We're not going to have any of that. But I think what I always try to do if I do bring in real historical characters is obviously I'm going to put words in their mouths. I'm writing a novel. But I try not to be egregious, and outrageous about it. I try to honor who they were, whether they were good guys or bad guys. I mean, Goering was a well-known drug addict, so there's a bit of that in there. He also was known to wear makeup, so there's a bit of that in there. I'm not interested in caricatures by any means. So I try to go for something a little richer than that. But yeah, the lines, what I always say is that I fictionalize real people and I realize fictional ones. That's my sort of motto. And without I don't think anyone could complain too much about the depictions I make of real life figures.
Okay, cool. So how different was it doing something in sort of modern history than it was from your previous works, like, Plague or something like that?
Different. Obviously, you're dealing with a different backdrop. I suppose one of the big differences would be that more people have an awareness, I suspect, of the 1930s than they do of the 1450s, for example.
Okay.
So that, and we're more aware of it because we've seen movies. We've seen the newsreel footage. We've seen the actual black and white movies, or even the color ones, which are creeping in at the end of the 30s. And I have to say that I modeled the novel quite a bit on the sort of the ethos of those 1930s movies, those caper movies. Katharine Hepburn would be a role model for me in terms of Roxy, tough, independent,
right.
Get up and go woman. So there is that. One other aspect would be the dialogue. When I'm setting things in the 1600s, I don't write oldie worldy dialogue by any means, and I don't try to recreate accurately how they spoke, because I don't think anyone would read it. But you give a flavor. You give a flavor of a period. With the 1930s, people are more aware of how they spoke. Given that those movies and the newsreels and all those things we've seen. So I was able, I think it was an advantage to me. I was able to create a sort of caper stroke film noir style of both narration and dialogue. So that was interesting. So that was more. But I also have a background as a playwright, so I love dialogue, and I love using dialogue as a major part of the action. So that would be one of the big differences. But other than that, it's taking characters and putting them into tough situations, be it a highwayman in the Great Plague of London or an aviatrix on the Hindenburg. You're researching your details, you're getting those right, but it's all about character for me, always has been. So once you've got that background detail right, how will that background detail affect the character? That's the most important thing.
Okay, cool. And then in terms of, because you're writing different eras, different periods, you have to sort of insert yourself into that era to write those characters and to understand their worlds. How much time do you spend researching? And is it before you begin the novel? Do you research throughout the process? How does that work?
I used to, but before I actually began writing novels, I thought, oh my God, I must know everything about every part of the period before I could even start. Which I discovered this since, and talking to other writers as well, it becomes clear that it's a thing, that research can be procrastination, and all us writers, as you know, suffer from that to a certain extent. So after my first book, when I basically researched it for 6 years in order to put off writing it because I was terrified, once I started writing it, then realized that 80% of what I'd read was useless. No, not useless, but not strictly relevant. From then on, I would research something probably for a couple of months, especially if it's a period I didn't know very well, like the Great Plague, Great Fire of London, English history at school, vague memories, but no specific knowledge. So I sit in my lovely comfy chair in my office and read for 2 to 3 months, making quite extensive notes specific to the story as well, not just, I will sort of find a cool fact and go, and I'll write NB, this could affect how the highwayman meets the thief taker or something.
Okay.
And then I dive in, knowing that the story, again, going back to the idea, the characters are the most important and the story, most important as well. That and the characters will tell me what I need to research next. So my table is awash with reference books and stuff. The internet, of course, is a great resource. I get very patchy reception in my hut, though, so it's quite good. I don't immediately, I don't go on and I don't check Facebook every 3 minutes, or my sales figures. And more often than not, given the type of writer I am, who tends to, burn through a draft, if I don't know something, and unless it's easily accessible, I don't want to stop my flow, so I'll just put a question mark. I don't need to know the cost of a Mickey of whiskey in 1937 until later, right?
Okay.
Especially if it's getting in the way. So,
all right. So you mentioned something that I think readers or listeners, I should say, would potentially say, did he say hut? So where do you do your writing?
Yes. Well, no, I don't. I've started not wanting to talk about it because if I'm not getting hate mail yet, I get a lot of sort of back chat from other authors because yes, I'm afraid I admitted I write in a cedar octagon in a forest. And people get annoyed with me. And I inadvisedly mentioned it once at the Pacific Northwest Writers Conference, and everyone was going, "Oh, the cedar octagon," and they were going to get a T-shirt made for the next year. It said, "I'll be in my cedar octagon," So, yeah, but it is a gorgeous space. It's one of the reasons we bought this property. It was already there, an artist's studio, and it's absolutely beautiful. It's all beautifully tooled wood inside. A real talented artist, carpenter, actually made it. It's just that right distance from the house. It's
Right.
about 25 paces, but I go into that other world.
And as you mentioned, you don't have a good Wi-Fi signal there, which I think is also a bonus. Not just the great view and the beautiful scenery, but less Wi-Fi, so you can't get distracted by the things.
Not so easily, that's for sure. Yeah.
Now, so Chasing the Wind, your latest release, and you have been traditionally published author from the beginning, right?
Yep.
Built a career through this, but you did something slightly different with Chasing the Wind. And so what happened?
Well, as many of your listeners will be aware, and as you and I have discussed before, the business has changed, unutterably, really, in the times that I've been in it. When I joined, it was still much smaller. It was pre-ebook. Publishers still felt a sort of obligation to really nurture talent. And so they essentially pay you a living wage to write books, which was lovely. Some writers got more, some writers got less, but generally, if you were a mid-list author with promise, like I've been all the time, I suppose, they paid you a living wage. Those days are done. Mid-list authors, I don't know if you saw the Society of Authors in the UK did a survey. Last one they did was 2005. And in 2018, they published this survey and said that authors' earnings have dropped 42% in that time.
Wow.
And the amount of authors who are actually making a living as authors has gone down from something like 40% to 11%. So, and all of us have experienced this, I think. So the mid-list has sort of expanded, and there's the front list has got smaller, but that's where all the resources go. And the first-timers have actually, they can do all right because publishers are willing to take a bit of a gamble on them because they've got no track record, right? Because the track record, the curse of BookScan and Nielsen and stuff, you're only as good as your last book, right, in terms of marketing. So I realized the writing was on the wall a while ago, and I've been having conversations with gurus of the industry, such as yourself, and wanting to dabble in that side. I've got a quite extensive backlist, number of books I've got back. But then the other things that are happening in the industry are there's been a real drop in foreign sales, which used to make up probably a quarter of my income. And there's been also a real drop actually in historical fiction, particularly in the States. They seem to not be buying it much anymore unless it's really American historical fiction. So American Civil War, American Revolutionary War, they have other history as well, of course. So other aspects of the American history. But British history, like my last two books, Plague and Fire, serial killer stories set in the Great Plague and Great Fire of London, hard to sell over there. Interest, but people in the end going, well,
Okay.
So even though I've got an American heroine in Chasing the Wind, the powers that be decided, people were very kind about it and loved it, but just didn't buy it. So I thought, right, this is my chance. Since the Brits didn't buy it either because they said, oh, it's about an American. And the Americans didn't buy it because it's, one of the other thing the Americans don't like, it was pre-sold in Canada. And Canada is actually a fairly good chunk of the market for them. So they tend to like all of North America. So I thought, yeah, this is my chance. I'm going to self-publish it everywhere else. And then I went to Self-Pub University, basically, learning from people like yourself and I joined a wonderful group called the Creative Academy. Look them up. They are brilliant. They have live sessions every week on craft and business and all that. Really been trying to learn that side of the game with, I would say at the moment, mixed results, though it's taken a bit of an upswing even today, which we'll talk about, I know. Yeah. So that's why I decided to get to investigate and become the new beast I was hearing about, the hybrid author.
Okay. And so, I'm holding in my hands, because I was fortunate enough to catch you at a book signing in the Toronto area not too long ago. I'm holding in the hand the Random House Canada version of Chasing the Wind.
Mm-hmm.
And what we'll do is on the show notes on starkreflections.ca, we'll show the Random House cover and then the cover that you had commissioned, because this was just the Canadian edition. And so you're self-publishing rest of world, like US and rest of world, through Kindle Direct Publishing, Kobo Writing Life, Draft to Digital, I believe, or direct to Apple, etc. Right?
Well, at the moment, I'm just doing Kindle. I decided to do KDP Select for the first 90 days. I will go wide, but part of you get conflicting advice all around, of course. But a lot of people said no, start with that, and you get a lot of extra promo and stuff. And the fact that I can do what I've done today, the countdown.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. You're running today. It's July 30th, and you're running a Kindle countdown deal. So the book is regularly priced what, American?
It's $4.99.
$4.99, which is what, $10 cheaper than the ebook in Canada?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and everyone was. Well, that's right. Absolutely, no, you're quite right. No, a lot of people. That was one of the big debates. What price do I put it out at? And a lot of people said to me, "Well, look, you already have a following. You are C.C. Humphreys. You've sold a lot of books over the years. Don't underprice yourself." So I went in at $4.99, which in retrospect was probably too high because I have a bit of a following. But let's face it, most people out there don't know who I am. So it was great to come back and have this sort of second kick at the can with the Kindle countdown.
Okay, so what
And
is it? Is it 99 cents?
99 cents. And I've kept it at 99 for 5 days.
Okay.
Rather than, sometimes it's an incremental back up to the 4.99. I've kept it at 99 cents. I think it has to go back to 4.99 for a short period of time, but then I'm probably going to drop it. I've been reading quite a lot, and the sweet spot is 2.99, sometimes 3.99 I hear. So
Right.
I'm
Well, it
probably
depends on the genre and what the tolerance in each category is. But this has been, I mean, you had a relatively moderate launch, but this seems to have been something that's really pushed your author ranking and the rankings for the books. Can you share? So what did you do? You ran a countdown deal, and then what did you use a third-party service like a BookBub or something like that? How did you?
I didn't use BookBub myself, but I used the people who you've done a program about. In fact, that's when I heard about them first, Written Word Media,
Okay.
Ricky Woolman. And so I used her. Now, originally, I had her from the beginning, so I paid I think it was $399 for the package, which would be all this promo.
Like the new release package or something like
exactly,
that? Okay.
new release package. But it didn't work. Now, I don't blame them for that. It was a number of factors. But I wrote back to them and said, look, it didn't work. And they went, well, we really want you to be satisfied, so we're going to do it again on the countdown for you, which is delightful of them. So without any extra money changing hands. So they've done that today. Ricky's been great. She's looked at my categories and my keywords and all that stuff. So really highly recommended. She advised me to book 2 other entities, eReader News and BookSends.
Okay.
So I booked both those. So that went out today as well. So I assume that's had an effect on the figures, and it's selling steadily and well, and it's raised my author ranking from way down 50,000 or something to I think I'm at 11,000 now or something. And then the book is I should check these figures again. I might have got this the wrong way around, but I think the book is now 4,000 in the Kindle store.
Okay.
And my author ranking is 11,000, which is pretty high.
Okay.
Considering where I was.
And then in the categories, it's actually ranking relatively high as well.
Well, that's a great thing. Yes, I mean, it's in the top 100 in 3 different categories, including noir, which I like, including German historical fiction. But the best of all, I think it's when I last looked, and that might have changed because it changes by the hour, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I quite understand people saying, "Don't check your figures every hour." It's too tempting. But last time I looked, it was 25th
Wow.
in historical thrillers,
Oh,
which is right where it should be. So I've sent out another appealing tweet to all the Americans to try to get them, because they can only buy that edition on Amazon.com.
Right.
To try to boost it into the top 20. That would be grand.
Or people who have a Kindle Unlimited account can, of course, read it for free at whatever price it happens to be, and that does still help increase your ranking. So
it does.
Reading your book for free actually helps your ranking too. So that's another thing people can do if they're listening to this and you're in the US. You can check that out because you're still in your first 90-day tour of duty on KDP Select.
That's right. Indeed, that's true. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you've also experimented with some other things because you've got the rights back to some of your other works. So what's going on in that regard? Are you able to talk about that yet?
Sure, absolutely. Well, the other big thing I did with the countdown was that people kept saying to me, product is king. You've got to get more stuff out there. Because when I went with Chasing the Wind, I didn't have any end matter that said, hey, you like that? Buy the next one. Partly because it doesn't have a sequel. At the moment, I get a lot of emails saying, when am I going to read the next one? Maybe I'll do it. I'd love to do it because I like her a lot. So I decided, right, my next plan was to bring out Plague and Fire, which were very successful in Canada, but not so successful elsewhere. The UK, I have to say, didn't publish it very well. Didn't have copies available, so no one really knew it was out. Canadians did really well with it.
But it's British history. Sorry.
You'd think.
Did I bring up a sore point?
Oh, really sore point? No. I mean, if I want to bitch about it, my publisher actually, It was the week I was back in London for the 350th anniversary of the Great Fire of London, when my book called Fire, with fire on the cover, was out that week. I went into Waterstones, the big chain there, and asked them if they had any copies, and they looked it up on their computer and said, "Oh yeah, there are 2 copies in London."
Oh, God.
2 copies of the book in the whole of London. So, I was...
Well, it is a small city. You got to remember.
Small, it's a village, really. Small village at that, yeah. So, but anyway, I was less pleased about, but having said that, Doubleday in Toronto did a fantastic job, and Plague won the best crime novel in Canada in 2015, from the CWA, Canadian Crime Writers, run the Arthur Ellis Award, it's called. So, a very popular book up here, but not as seen in the States because of the aforementioned, not their history.
Is this a split right book then? So the Canadian publisher still has the rights, but all the other rights have either reverted to you now, or how does that work?
No, what happened was they just didn't sell the territories. So, so I still have those rights. So I'm free to do with them what I will.
Okay.
Yeah. It was only sold to UK and Commonwealth, which was quite a normal grouping. So I got Plague together. I formatted it through Vellum. I uploaded it through them as well. Vellum's great, I have to say.
Yeah.
It took me a bit of time to learn it, but it's really not that complicated. It's just I'm not very technical, but I've learned it. Uploaded it and made it available. The other thing I had to do with Plague was I was really lucky with Chasing the Wind's cover, because my old cover designer in the UK, this wonderful designer called Henry Stedman, who did a lot of my books, he was very kindly took some time and I said, I want something similar to the Canadian one, but not the same. I think you advised me about that.
Yeah.
And so I got one, and you'll show, as you say, you'll put it in the show notes. So I love the new cover. I just had to buy a photograph off Shutterstock, and he put it together, and it's a great cover. And then he actually put the paperback, the POD cover together for me as well.
Oh, excellent.
This time I haven't done POD yet for Plague, but I did do the cover myself. I again went into Shutterstock. I had 2 pics left from my package, and I got this quite cool cover, very different cover, photograph, and then played with the fonts and the alignments and stuff. And my friends at the Creative Academy, we had a sort of 5-person session where they went, you should do this, you should do this. So we changed it. So I've got a great cover. And that's now clickable from the back of the Kindle ebook of Chasing the Wind.
Perfect for this promo. So people are buying the book for 99 cents or reading it on Kindle Unlimited. And then there's a call to action to get your next book where you don't have to wait a year to see how it sold from a royalty report. You shouldn't log on every day and look, but you can log on and see how the.
That's right.
Okay.
But what I'm planning on doing, though, I've sort of done what they'd call a soft launch, I suppose, for Plague. I haven't been saying, hey, everyone, look, Plague's out here. Because what I want to do is actually, in a month's time, I'll do a Kindle countdown on Plague. And then by then also, I'll have got myself together enough to do the sequel to Plague, Fire, get that up and list it in the back of Plague. And
ideally, before you promote Plague, you're going to have Fire up for pre-order or already available.
Possibly. Yes, that's true. Yeah, you're right. Yes, I mean,
the next step is you want to read the next one, don't you?
Exactly. So that's what I was going to do. I was going to have it. You're right. I should probably have it up already and ready to go. Yes. Yeah.
Now, you're experimenting with hybrid in multiple aspects, which I love. But you've also done something because your background as an actor of film and stage. I think the first weekend we met at When Words Collide last year. I was obviously blown away by your reading. It's so just wonderfully dramatic and captivating reading. And a lot of author readings may not have that energy. And so one of the things I'd asked was, for you to share some advice to writers on how to approach a reading. And is it okay if I ask you to share that advice here today?
Sure. I can't remember what I said, so I might say something completely different now.
That's okay.
like
things change.
Don't do it yourself. Hire a professional like me. I am available. Mark will make my job
So you can come and pretend to be me at a book reading? Is that how it works?
Anytime. We both got a beard. You've got a little less hair than me. No, you've got the same amount of hair. You've just shaven yourself. No, I mean, I think what I shared on that Facebook Live interview that you did was one was the thing that all actors need to understand and often don't, actually, including myself for years, is that when you walk into an audition, the people there really want you to succeed.
Right.
It's not like they're going to go, oh no, there's someone else. That they want the person they are looking for to walk in the room. It's the same with an audience at a reading. They really would love you to be, to be good, and they're not sitting there with scorecards in their hands. They're sitting there to have a good time. So you're with friends to start with. They wish you well. In terms of the actual reading, I mean, I do have that advantage in that, as you say, I'm a trained actor, and also the stuff I read, my own stuff. I kind of discovered early on when I did my first audiobook of my own stuff was that I write to be read aloud by me. So there's all these sort of ways I speak that I write as well. But I would say, be prepared to breathe. Obviously, take breath is important, but engage the audience. It shouldn't all just be down on the page and staring. And you've also got to be a little aware of your tone. It's really good to vary the tone a bit. So if you talk like this and you're reading like this all the time, it can get very rapidly quite boring, right? But if you're modulating it a bit, and certainly if you've got dialogue, it's a great opportunity to change pitch slightly with the dialogue. That's another good thing to do, I think.
Okay. Because I think it was a scene from Jack Absolute that you had read, and it was a sex scene.
Oh yeah,
to a mixed audience.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was not dirty. It was implied. Well, not implied, but it was brilliant because it was this Victorian era.
Actually, it was 18th century, but yeah. It was a sort of it was a sexy scene and quite an erotic scene, I think. But then it
hilarious.
Something quite else. Yeah, it tips into something that's quite funny after that. Yeah. So, yeah.
So how do you pick, when you're going through, are you picking it because you're imagining the reactions? Because obviously, one of the things that we learn, from the speakers group that I'm a member of is playing on the emotions, is hitting as many emotions as possible in a reading. So you're going from the high of the laughter to the high of the excitement to the tension, right? There's everything in that scene. Is that one of the factors that you choose when you're deciding what you're going to read?
Yes, I suppose it is. I mean, that scene was one that I've read often. I think I read it first in late night sex readings at the Historical Novel Society conference in Albany, New York in 2007. And it went down absolute gangbusters. It's one of those scenes that just works as a self-contained passage very well because it makes them laugh and makes them cry. Well, not exactly cry, but gets them excited a bit. Ooh, this is a bit naughty, and then the humor, and then the sort of action as well. So that's a good scene. But with if I'm reading from Chasing the Wind, for example, there's a couple of passages, and I think you were at the bookstore, and I read one of the passages then. That just sort of, I like to catch a flavor of the book.
Okay.
What's the style of this book? A bit noirish, a bit caperish in the 1930s sense. The dialogue is snappy. She's cool,
right.
Tough and cool. And so I try to pick a passage that might sort of embody all those things.
That's cool. So now that we're back on Chasing the Wind, you also teased us with, there's an element of this era, this novel, that relates to your parents.
Well, in the sense that my parents, I mean, I'm quite old and my parents had me quite late. So, my parents were very much products of the 20s and 30s and World War II, especially. And my dad was a fighter pilot and my mum was a spy. So a hard act to follow, I tell you. So I do want to, I'm planning on, and I've drawn up quite extensive ideas for a book about them. Originally, it was going to be a novel, but now I've decided I really like to do that as a sort of creative nonfiction, as a memoir. get to know them better again, since then they haven't been with us for some time. But yes, so I was intrigued and am intrigued by that world, the world that formed them and they formed me. What were the influences? So that's one side of it. And of course, the drama of that period. The 30s was, what do they call it? A dark, dishonest decade, the dark valley, they call it. It led to, obviously, the cataclysm. But what was going on? What were the forces? I find that fascinating. My dad being a pilot, of course, I've been interested in flying all my life. I've never been a pilot myself. I did one of those sort of ink blot tests when I was a child at school, those ones where you tell color blindness, and I couldn't see the pink numbers in those blots. And so I'm red-green blind. So I came home and told my family, and my father went, oh, you'll never be a pilot then. So, okay, fair enough. That was that avenue of pleasure cut off. But yeah, obviously fascinated by flying, fascinated by thrills and chasing, and my mum was a spy, so I'd like to write about that. And Chasing the Wind is not a spy story per se, but it is a mystery as well.
Right.
So
it has that intrigue and
yeah,
right, that drama.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, so there is that element certainly is there. That I mean, we think our parents often are just these sort of fully, they were always old, they were always staid, and they always did this, wise, or maybe not all the time, but that sort of thing, and really annoying. And then, but they, you trying to imagine my dad at 23, volunteering for the RAF because he knew war was coming, and he was, he wanted to fly planes.
Wow.
Who was that 23-year-old? And then there's my mum, former Ms. Oslo, just extraordinary woman, and massive travel. My family always been travelers. She was an illegal immigrant in America for 2 years in the 30s, went back to Norway, fought the Germans. I mean, wonderful stuff. But who was she? That was my mum, my mum my mum who'd knit me sweaters, and yeah.
Now, your father, as a pilot, had a very special passenger at one time.
Ah, yes. Well, this is both I think quite an interesting story of the time, but also an interesting writing story. If you'd like me to lead into that whole side of it,
yeah, I'd love that. That would be. I think that would be fun for the listeners.
So there was a famous English playwright, which many of your listeners will know, called Noel Coward. And he was one of the great entertainers of the 20th century, really. And I say entertainer, not in any way disparagingly. He was a well-known playwright who wrote some wonderful plays. Not only the sort of boulevard comedies, but also some more serious stuff as well. He was a wonderful songwriter, wrote some beautiful songs, and poet and all sorts of things. An entertainer and actor himself. And he was very flamboyant, Noel. You always see him in a sort of dinner jacket with a cigarette holder and all that. So he was out in the Middle East entertaining the troops. So my father was in the Middle East for 3.5 years during the war, 41 to 44. And he was, my dad had started out as a fighter pilot, but by 1941, he was already 25. And that's a bit old to be a fighter pilot, people say. They want 19-year-olds, right? So he moved into Transport Command. He flew everything from, transporting planes around, supplies, all that stuff, but sometimes people. And because of his background, my father had been an actor before the war, they said, oh, Humph. If you're a Humphreys, you're always called Humph. Right?
Humph, yeah.
Humph, you've got a good job for you today. The next couple of weeks, you're going to take Noel Coward around. My father was like, oh my God, Noel Coward. So he flew Noel Coward around. And Noel Coward, in his Middle East diaries, wrote, I was flown around by a very handsome young pilot officer called Peter Humphreys, son of Cecil Humphreys. My grandfather, his father, was a very well-known actor. He said, so the blood of Wardour Street flows in these desert sands, he wrote. Anyway, my father, of course, he was still, outside the war. War wasn't everything. He still wanted to be an actor and a writer, and he started writing. And he'd written a thriller, a play. So when he got back to London, he sent it to Noel, because Noel said, dear boy, keep in touch, So my father sent it to him, and Noel Coward wrote back this letter, which I have framed in my hut, because my father had it framed where he wrote when he lived in southern Spain. And the letter began with one of the best opening lines of all time, I think. He said, "My dear Peter, be prepared. I'm going to be rather beastly to you. I didn't like your play very much." So that's how it began. "I'm going to be rather beastly to you." And then he went on to eviscerate this play, say things like, "Oh, I've never read so many cliches in one place in my life. If you the only one you left out was 'it never rains but it pours.' And if you ever say 'but me no buts' again, I'll cut your bloody head off." which I thought was wonderful. But there's this wonderful piece of writing advice in it. Towards the end, he says, "Actually, dear boy, you have a good sense of structure, which is the primary attribute of the dramatist. But," he said, "in the future, you must read more, you must write much more, and let your characters dictate your plot rather than your plot dictate your characters."
Ooh, I just got a chill.
Hmm.
Brilliant advice.
But yes, I mean, it's advice we all strive to live by. And, when I teach writing, which I do fairly frequently now, people know that one of my favorite words is oscillation. Oscillation in all sorts of ways, but the oscillation between plot and character being two of the most important oscillation in a way. And, there's never going to be a plotless book that is all character dictated, but there shouldn't also be a plot-filled book that basically imposes that plot on the characters. The characters have got to have a leeway, I think, to make their own choices and to tell you, the author, which way they want to go, rather than the way you've determined they will.
Okay, cool. And that's a perfect segue into the next question I wanted to ask you is, given your history and success in various aspects of publishing, what is advice that you would want to share with a beginning writer on the start of their writing journey?
Well, I mean, that's a very multi-layered question, because there would be the writing advice, how to, trust that it's a process is the thing that I say to all my new students. What trips people up all the time and tripped me up for years is the thought that it has to be good straight away.
Okay.
I remove the words good and bad from my dictionary when I start a book. It's not about that ever. The first draft. It's about getting the story done. It's about finding out who the characters are and finding out what plot they're going to get you involved in.
Okay.
Always understanding that you're oscillating between some ideas you might have and those characters. I suppose the big advice I would give is to write. Okay. I still beat myself up because I'm not at my desk at 6 every morning writing for hours. Because the business, all this stuff I'm doing outside the writing gets in the way. But, I suppose I've got a reasonable output. I've just finished the second draft of novel number 17, and I've written 4 plays in 18 years. So it's not a bad record, but I know I could do more. And I think writing teaches you how to write. The more you write, the better you get. People love my first novel. Some people think it's still the best thing I wrote just because it's such a wild story, The French Executioner. They just have such a ride on it. Mm-hmm. But I know that structurally and various other aspects of it are I would look at it now if I reread it and went, I could have done that better. But I acknowledge that it's just a hell of a fun thing that happened. Right. So you do get better, and you get more... you also develop ways of working that are going to be speedier, I think, and expeditious and all that. So yeah, those would be my twin things. Understand that it's a process, and write.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that wonderful advice, some great stories. Where can people find you online and learn more about you?
Well, I have a website, cchumphreys.com. I have an Author Central page. You can follow me on Twitter at HumphreysCC. You can follow me on Facebook, of course. There's Author CC Humphreys, and there's that. Yeah, so I've got I'm not hard to trace, really. There's quite a lot of stuff out there about me. So
fantastic.
And if you delve deep enough, you can watch these videos of me being a gladiator in the 1980s and Zorro's nemesis in the 1990s, and an immortal in Highlander in the 2000s. And there's lots of footage of me in various things as well. So words and images.
And because you've teased the listeners, I'm going to make sure that you send me some of these links so I can include them in the show notes, so we can get some of those up for people who are curious to check those out. Chris, thanks so much for joining me today, and best of luck. I hope this promotion goes really, really well. I will do a follow-up probably in a future episode if you share some information on how the full, how the full 5 days went with this Kindle Countdown deal with Chasing the Wind, and how, Ricky and the folks at Written Word Media helped you bring this novel up several notches.
I would be happy to give you the update later on.
All right, thank you, and have a wonderful day.
Cheers. Thanks, Mark.
I wanted to share a quick update on Chris's numbers for the Countdown deal, which he was running this week. He had mentioned how it was doing, and he was using Bargain Booksy and a couple of other promo sites to do some stacked promos on it. And here are the numbers that he's shared about how he's done. So on day 1, Monday, he sold 93 units. On day 2, Tuesday, he sold 32 units. But then on day 3, Wednesday, the last update I got from Chris was he had sold more than 722 units. And has had the book hitting number 1 in historical thrillers and pulp on the Kindle store. And I was absolutely delighted to hear this. And I'm looking forward to watching how this book continues to sell post-promo, particularly when it goes back to its regular price, where he can actually be earning some decent income off of these sales. Now, in terms of my reflections on this interview, again, there's always so much here, but I think I want to point out something that Chris quickly said in passing that I think is worthwhile, particularly on the element of the craft of writing, or at least helping with the craft of writing. Now, he talked about research being a great way to procrastinate from writing, but then he shared something of what he does when he's in the throes of writing and realizes he needs some sort of historic fact or other fact, a detail, the price of something, for example. Instead of letting that stop his flow, he inserts a question mark in the text and then keeps writing, and then he goes back and adds it in later. Now, I've done the same thing. I usually use square brackets, and then I make a short sentence or statement such as, insert the number of miles between New York City and Buffalo, or perhaps insert here the actual year they were engaged, as mentioned in Chapter 2. The key is, don't let the fact that you don't have that information, that little missing bit of info, stop you from going forward. Because I found that when I stop and I go and look it up, especially if I'm going online to look it up, I fall down a rabbit hole and I lose any traction, any momentum I'd been making on the writing. So just use a question mark or a square bracket to denote that you'll fix or update that in the rewrite and keep moving. How about you? How do you deal with this type of thing in your own writing? Is there something you use that's useful? Feel free to share that with other listeners or readers of the show notes in the comments for this show at starkreflections.ca, episode 32. Well, that's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. And a special thank you to the patrons of the show. I greatly appreciate what you're doing there. And if you're interested in having access to additional Stark Reflections on writing and extended details of some of the experiments I'm conducting and publishing, you can have access to that for as little as $1 a month via my Patreon account at patreon.com/starkreflections. If you enjoy the show and like to help me out in other ways, feel free to share it with a writer you feel will find value in the interviews and reflections. You're paying it forward in that sense, and it does help me. Or feel free to leave a review on the podcatcher of your choice, because those reviews do make a difference in helping other people discover the show. Thanks again for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. Until episode 33 next week, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.